Sir, would you buy me? My father wants to sell me and I'm scared." The words came out as a whisper, a broken little sound lost in the vast desert. When the lone Apache warrior heard them, something he thought long dead inside his chest cracked open. He stared down at the trembling boy, and the answer he gave in that moment would not just change their lives, it would rewrite their destinies. Dust puffed up around Thomas's bare feet as he walked the streets of San Bartolo. He was only 9, but his small body was wiry and tough, baked hard by the Mexican sun. He watched the chickens pecking in the dirt, his mind a million miles away. He stopped outside the cantina, his father's place, and pressed his small nose against the grimy glass. He needed to hear. He needed to know. Inside, a man's voice hissed like a rattlesnake. 3,000 silver pesos, Herrera. You've had 6 months. The time is up." Tomas saw his father, Eusebio, his hands shaking as he polished a glass that was already clean. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "I know what I owe you, Coronado. Just give me 2 more weeks, please." The stranger, Coronado, let out a laugh that was cold and sharp. It made the hairs on Tomas's arms stand up. 2 more weeks? So you can slip away in the night like a coward? There was a long pause. Tomas held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs. "No, Herrera. You pay me now, or you take my other offer." A cold dread washed over Tomas. He pushed himself closer to the glass, his breath fogging the pain. He had to hear this. He had to know his price. "The boy is strong," Coronado's voice continued, smooth and oily. "Don Mario is always looking for new hands at the hacienda. He pays well for a boy who knows how to keep his mouth shut and obey." "He's my son," Eusebio muttered, but the words had no strength. They were hollow, empty things. "Your son?" Coronado laughed again, a cruel, barking sound. "When was the last time you treated him like one? I've seen you hit him for dropping a sack of grain. I've seen him sleeping in the stables because you've spent his food money on your cheap whiskey." Tomas stumbled back from the window as if he'd been struck. The world tilted, the dusty street seeming to sway beneath his feet. He couldn't breathe. He ran. He fled to the back of the cantina, to the small, dark space where old tools and sacks of corn were stored. He curled himself into a tight ball in the shadows, hugging his knees, trying to make himself disappear. "How much?" he whispered to the silent sacks of corn. "How much would someone pay for me?" The words felt like poison in his mouth. How much is a boy worth? A boy that nobody wants. He stayed there for hours, listening to the muffled sounds from inside. He didn't want to hear the final deal, but he knew it was coming. He could picture it perfectly. His father, stumbling out with red, bleary eyes, looking at him not as a son, but as a debt, a problem to be solved. Maybe he'd get a slap, maybe just a cold order to pack his things. As the sun began to bleed across the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and red, Tomas made a decision. He would not be sold. He would not stand there and listen as his own father put a price on his head. He would not wait to be handed over to the mysterious Don Mario like a piece of livestock. With legs that felt like they were made of stone, he went back to the tiny, windowless room where he slept. He had a small, worn satchel, and into it he placed his only other shirt, a piece of bread so hard it could break a tooth, and a dented tin canteen. His fingers brushed against a small bundle wrapped in cloth. It was the only thing he had from his mother. She had tucked it into his things before she vanished. He'd never opened it. It was his one secret, his only treasure. Night fell, and the desert grew quiet. Thomas waited, listening to the rise and fall of his father's drunken snores. Then, like a ghost, he slipped out of the cantina and into the cool night air. The stars were scattered across the black sky like diamonds, brighter than he'd ever seen them. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, A tiny spark of something that wasn't fear flickered inside him. It might have been hope. He turned his face to the north, toward the rocky hills his mother used to tell him about, where she said the spirits of the earth lived. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he had to go. Anywhere was better than here. He walked for hours, the dusty trail turning into a cruel path of sharp stones that cut his bare feet. His canteen was empty before the moon was high in the sky. Still he pushed on, driven by a desperate strength he never knew he possessed. By the time the sun began to rise again, it was a merciless, white-hot enemy. San Bartolo was gone, lost behind him. He was alone in a brutal, endless landscape of red rock and thorny cactus. Then his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the burning sand, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. The sun beat down on his head without mercy. His mouth was full of cotton. His throat was a desert of its own. He wanted to cry, but his body had no water left to make tears. "Mama," he rasped, his voice a dry crackle. "I don't know what to do." His eyelids felt heavy, so heavy. The world began to fade, slipping away like sand through his fingers. And that's when he heard it, the soft, slow crunch of a horse's hooves on stone. Nahuel had been tracking a deer, but the small, staggering footprints in the sand told a different story. His instincts screamed at him to be cautious. Sometimes, soldiers used a child as bait, a trap to lure an Apache warrior out into the open. His hand rested on the hilt of his knife as he moved closer, silent as a shadow. But when he saw the small figure sprawled on the ground, all his warrior caution melted away. It was just a boy, alone, dying. He slid from his horse and knelt by the child's side. The boy was unconscious, his skin burned raw by the sun, his lips cracked and bleeding. Nahuel placed a calloused hand on his forehead and felt the raging fire of a deadly fever. "Niño," he said softly in Spanish, "can you hear me?" Tomas's eyes fluttered open. The world was a blinding white haze. A man's face leaned over him, dark and weathered, framed by long black hair. An Apache. But the boy felt no fear. In the warrior's deep dark eyes, he saw something he recognized. Loneliness. "Are you taking me back?" Tomas croaked. "Back where?" Nahuel asked, his brow furrowed. "To San Bartolo, to my father. He wants to sell me, to Don Mario." The name hit Nahuel like a physical blow. Don Mario. He knew that name. He knew it all too well. Don Mario, the monster who ran the hacienda, the man who took in unwanted children and worked them until they were nothing but broken husks. The same man who had ordered the raid that had taken Nahuel's own family from him years ago. The wound was old, but it had never healed. "How much would you pay for me?" Tomas asked, his gaze fixed on the Apache's face. "My father says I'm not worth the corn I eat." The question was so honest, so full of a pain that no child should ever know. It shattered the wall of ice Nahuel had built around his heart. He didn't say a word. He simply lifted Tomas into his arms. The boy was impossibly light, like a fragile, wounded bird. Nahuel placed him gently across his horse, then mounted behind him, one hand holding the reins, the other holding the boy steady. "You have no price," he murmured, his voice rough with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. "Because you are not a thing to be bought or sold." Tomas sagged against the warrior's broad chest, feeling a warmth that was more than just the sun. It was the warmth of protection. He didn't understand the man's words, not really, but he understood the tone. It was the same tone his mother had used, a lifetime ago. A tone full of a love he thought he'd lost forever. Nahuel turned his horse north, toward the hidden places in the rocky hills. He had a secret refuge there, a cave where he had learned to live with his solitude. But as he rode, with the small, broken boy held safe in his arms, he knew that for the first time in a very long time he was no longer alone. He carried Tomas into the hidden cave. It was a simple place, but it was a home. Animal hides for warmth, clay pots for cooking, and bundles of herbs hanging from the stone walls. He laid the boy down on a soft fur pelt. The fever was bad. Tomas's skin was hot to the touch. Nahuel moved with a quiet urgency, using knowledge passed down from his grandmother. He prepared a tea from desert plants, whispering to them as his grandmother had taught him, asking for their help. When Tomas finally woke up, the cave was filled with the soft, golden light of sunset. He smelled something cooking, and a deep, gnawing hunger stirred in his stomach. The Apache sat by a small fire, stirring a pot. "Are you hungry?" he asked without looking up. Tomas could only nod. His throat felt like sandpaper. Nahuel brought him a wooden bowl filled with a hot, savory broth. The first sip was painful, but the second was like life itself pouring back into him. He drank it all, his hands shaking. "Why are you helping me?" Tomas finally managed to ask. Nahuel stared into the fire, the flames dancing in his dark eyes. He was silent for a long time. "Because once," he said, his voice low, "someone helped me when I had nothing left." "What happened to them?" "I lost them," Nahuel said simply. "Like I've lost everyone." That night, Tomas slept a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind he hadn't known in years. But Nahuel didn't sleep. He sat at the mouth of the cave, listening to the sounds of the desert night, the whisper of the wind, the call of a distant owl. But mostly, he listened to the steady, quiet breathing of the boy. It was a sound that brought back painful memories of a time when he had been a father, before soldiers and greed had burned his world to the ground. He had thought about leaving the boy in the next village, but he knew he couldn't. Not now. Not when a monster like Don Mario was hunting him. At dawn, as the first rays of sun touched the red rocks, Nahuel made a choice. He would protect this boy. He would care for him. It wasn't a plan, it was a promise. But trouble found them faster than he could have imagined. Just 3 days later, Nahuel was watching the horizon when he saw it. A rising cloud of dust. Riders. And they weren't just wandering cowboys. They were moving in a pattern. A search. "Stay here," he told Thomas in a low, urgent voice, "and do not make a sound." Thomas's eyes were wide with a terror Nahuel knew all too well. It was the fear of the hunted. Nahuel moved to the mouth of the cave, melting into the shadows of the rocks. The riders got closer, and his blood ran cold. He recognized the man in the lead. It was Eusebio, but he wasn't alone. Flanking him were 2 armed men wearing the colors of Don Mario's hacienda. "He has to be around here somewhere." Eusebio's voice carried on the wind, thin and desperate. One of Don Mario's men, a tall man with a brutal scar across his face, sneered. "The tracks lead to these hills, but I'm telling you, Herrera, your boy isn't worth this much trouble. Don Mario only wants him to settle your debt." "He's just a child," Eusebio mumbled. "Exactly," the scarred man said with a chilling grin. "A child who will work for free until your debt is paid. If he lasts that long—" A hot, white rage exploded in Nahuel's chest. He knew what happened to children who went to Don Mario's hacienda. They disappeared, or they came back with dead eyes and broken spirits. The riders passed so close to the cave that Nahuel could hear the creak of their leather saddles. But his hiding spot was good. The shadows hid the entrance completely. They rode past, their voices fading. But Nahuel knew this wasn't over. Don Mario was a relentless man. When he wanted something, he never gave up. He slipped back into the cave. Tomas hadn't moved, but his small body was trembling. "Was that my father?" he whispered. Nahuel nodded grimly. "But he wasn't looking for you to save you. He was looking for you to sell you." "Are they going to take me?" The fear in the boy's voice was a knife in Nahuel's gut. "Not while I'm alive." That night they packed what little they had. They had to move, deeper into the harsh lands to the north, Apache territory, where Don Mario's men wouldn't dare to follow. It was a dangerous journey, but it was their only chance. "What if we don't make it?" Tomas asked, his voice small. Nahuel looked at the boy. In just a few days, some color had returned to his cheeks. The hopeless, empty look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a flickering spark of fight. "We'll make it," Nahuel said, his voice firm. "Because we're a family now. A small one, but a family." The word felt strange on his tongue, a ghost from another life. But it also felt right. Before the sun rose, they were gone, moving like shadows through the treacherous landscape. Nahuel knew every secret of this land, every hidden spring, every defensible cave. He had survived here alone for years, but now he had someone else to protect. The sky opened up without warning. What started as a light drizzle quickly became a torrential downpour. The dry trails turned into rivers of thick red mud. They huddled under a rock overhang, but the wind was merciless, driving the cold rain into their bones. Thomas began to shiver violently, his lips turning a pale blue. The fever was coming back. Nahuel knew they needed to find real shelter, and fast. "There's a cabin," Nahuel said, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "Down in the valley. I don't know who lives there." It was a huge risk, but Tomas was fading. They had no other choice. The cabin was small but solid, a warm, golden light glowing in its single window. It looked like a haven. Nahuel approached with caution, his hand on his knife, Tomas clinging to his back. But before he could even knock, the door swung open. A woman stood there. She was young, maybe 27, with skin the color of rich earth and startling green eyes. Her long black hair was woven into a braid with small, colorful beads. She looked at Nahuel, her gaze taking in his Apache clothes, the rifle on his back, and the sick child. "Apache?" she asked in Spanish, her voice steady. Nahuel tensed, expecting the door to be slammed in his face. He simply nodded. Instead, she stepped aside. "Come in," she said, "before you both drown." The inside of the cabin was warm and smelled of wood smoke and drying herbs. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of plants and roots. She was a healer. "The boy is sick," she said. It wasn't a question. She gently touched Thomas's forehead with cool, practiced fingers. "Desert fever. I can treat this." Without another word, she began to move around the cabin, pulling down jars, her movements swift and confident. "Why are you helping us?" Nahuel asked, his voice laced with the suspicion of a man who had been hunted his whole life. She glanced at him over her shoulder as she mixed herbs in a bowl. "Because it is the right thing to do," she said, "and because a long time ago someone helped my brother when I couldn't." There was a deep pain in her voice, but Nahuel didn't push. He knew the weight of secrets. That night, Thomas slept soundly by the fire, wrapped in warm, dry blankets. Nahuel and the woman, whose name was Clara, sat at a small wooden table, the rain drumming on the roof above them. "He's not your son by blood," Clara said softly. "But the children of the heart are sometimes bound tighter than the children of blood. You speak like someone who knows." Her green eyes grew distant. "I had a younger brother, Miguel. He was my father's son, but not my mother's. My mother was Apache. Miguel's mother was a servant at the mission where he was the priest." "What happened to him?" Nahuel asked quietly. "He got sick. A fever, just like Tomas. I was young. I didn't know enough about the herbs then. I took him to the town doctor." Her voice cracked. "The doctor wouldn't see him. He called him a half-breed bastard and turned us away. Miguel died in my arms that night." She wiped a tear from her eye. "I swore that day that I would never turn away anyone who needed help, especially a child." Nahuel looked at her, and for the first time, he saw past the healer. He saw the same loneliness he carried inside himself, the loneliness of someone caught between two worlds belonging to neither. The next morning, Thomas was weak, but the fever had broken. Clara insisted they stay one more day just to be safe. But danger didn't wait for fevers to pass. That afternoon, a cowboy rode up to the cabin. He needed medicine for a lame horse. As Clara treated the animal, the cowboy talked, and his words were like a death knell. "Funny thing," he said casually. "Saw some of Don Mario's men up north. They're looking for a runaway boy, offering a reward, 20 silver pesos. Nahuel and Clara exchanged a look. 20 pesos. It was a fortune. Enough money to make a good man do a very bad thing. "Did they say where they were headed?" Clara asked, her voice perfectly calm. "North," the cowboy said. "Asking at every ranch, spreading the word." After the cowboy left, the small cabin felt a lot less safe. The silence was heavy with unspoken fear. "They're closing in," Nahuel said, his voice grim. "I can hide you," Clara offered. "They wouldn't think to look here." "No," Nahuel said immediately. "I won't bring this danger to your door." "Then I'm coming with you," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. Nahuel and Tomas stared at her, stunned. "Together?" Nahuel asked. "Why not?" she replied, a small, defiant smile on her face. "I've been alone long enough, and besides," she added, her gaze softening as she looked at Thomas, "a boy on the run needs a healer. The desert isn't kind." Thomas looked at her, his eyes wide. "You would really come with us?" "If you'll have me," she said gently. For the first time since he'd fled San Bartolo, a real, genuine smile spread across Thomas's face. "We leave at dawn," Nahuel said, his voice filled with a new resolve. "North, into Apache lands. I have people there who will help us." That night, as they prepared, Clara showed Thomas how to make a simple tea to calm the nerves. "Knowledge is power, Thomas," she told him. "A child who can care for himself is never truly lost." As Nahuel sharpened his knives by the fire, he realized he wasn't just a lone warrior anymore. He was the protector of this strange, fragile, and fierce little family. But far away, in the dark corners of the San Bartolo cantina, Eusebio's drunken words were giving Don Mario's men a new trail to follow. A trail that led directly to a lone cabin in a quiet valley. And the hunters were getting closer. They traveled for days, pushing deeper into the unforgiving territory of the Apache. Clara's knowledge of plants kept them fed, and Nahuel's knowledge of the land kept them hidden. Finally, they saw it in the distance. The Apache village, nestled among the red rock canyons. It should have been a place of safety. But as they got closer, a terrible silence hung in the air. There was no smoke from the cooking fires, no laughter of children. There was only the smell of ash and death. The village was a ruin. Homes were burned out shells. The ground was littered with the bodies of animals. It was a massacre. "Soldiers!" Nahuel growled, his hand tightening on his rifle. "They were here. Recently." Clara pulled Thomas close, trying to shield his eyes, but it was too late. The boy had seen too much already. They found him in the rubble of what was once the chief's home. Old Eagle, the tribe's elder, was propped against a crumbling wall, a dark stain spreading across his chest. His eyes were dim, but they flickered with recognition when he saw Nahuel. "Brother Wolf," he whispered in the Apache tongue, using the name they had given Nahuel years ago. "They told me you were dead." "What happened here?" Nahuel asked, kneeling beside him. Clara rushed forward with her medicine bag, but one look at the wound told her it was too late for herbs. "They came at dawn," Old Eagle rasped. "Soldiers. They said they were hunting renegades." He coughed, a spray of blood speckling his lips. "But it was a lie. They came for the land. They came for the boy." His gaze shifted to Thomas. "It is the boy they truly want." Thomas froze. How do you know?" Don Mario was here, the old man whispered. A week ago. He offered us money for you, but it's more than the debt. It's about what you are. With a trembling hand, Old Eagle pulled something from inside his shirt. It was a map drawn on a piece of deerskin. These lands, they do not belong to Mario, he said, his voice fading. He stole them years ago from the boy's parents. Tomas stepped forward, his heart pounding. My parents? Your mother was not a servant boy. She was Maria Esperanza Alvarez, the rightful owner of all this land. She married a Spaniard in secret. You are the heir. The world seemed to tilt under Clara's feet. She recognized some of the names on the map, places where her father, the priest, had held secret masses. My father. He knew, she breathed. Old Eagle gave a faint nod. Your father performed the marriage. He kept the records. They are hidden. In the old mission, San Jose, in the bell tower. His breath hitched, a final ragged sound. And then he was still. They stood in the ruins of the dead village, the silence broken only by the wind. The world had been turned upside down. Thomas wasn't a worthless boy being sold for a few pesos. He was the heir to a fortune. And the man hunting him wasn't just a cruel master. He was a thief and a murderer. What does it mean? Thomas asked, his voice shaking. Clara knelt in front of him, taking his small hands in hers. It means, Thomas, that you are more important than you ever imagined, and that there are powerful people who will do anything to keep that a secret. Nahuel studied the deerskin map, his face a mask of grim determination. We have to get to that mission, before Mario does. Those documents are the only thing that can prove the truth. And if they're not there? Clara asked. Then we keep running, Nahuel said. But we will run knowing the truth. That night, surrounded by the ghosts of the village, they made their plan. This was no longer about escape. This was about justice. Thomas, the boy who thought he was worth nothing, now carried the weight of his family's legacy on his small shoulders. He was no longer just running from something. Now he was running toward everything. The mission of San Jose was a skeleton against the dawn sky. Its walls were crumbling. Its roof had collapsed in places. It was a place of ghosts and forgotten prayers. Clara's hands trembled as they approached. This was where her father had lived out his last days, a man wrestling with his faith and his secrets. Are you sure they're here? Tomas whispered, the silence of the place pressing in on them. Only one way to find out, Nahuel said, his eyes scanning every shadow, every broken window. He saw no fresh tracks, but that didn't mean they were safe. They found the stairs to the bell tower. The wood groaned under their weight, threatening to give way with every step. At the top, in a small, dusty room filled with sleeping pigeons, Clara went to a loose stone in the wall. My father told me to hide this, she murmured, pulling out a small, rust-eaten metal box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were the papers. A marriage certificate signed by her father, uniting Maria Esperanza Alvarez and a man named Fernando Herrera, and a second document, a will. It's a will, Clara whispered, her voice filled with awe. Your mother left everything, all the lands, the rancho, to her son, to you, Tomas. Tomas stared at the faded ink on the old paper. It was real. Everything Old Eagle had said was real. He was not the son of a drunk. He was the son of a landowner, a rightful heir. And that means, Nahuel said, his voice a low growl, that Don Mario knows it. A sound from below cut him off, the crunch of heavy boots on stone, voices. Nahuel peered through a crack in the wall. His body went rigid. Mario, he hissed. He's here. Clara moved instantly, shoving the documents deep into her medicine bag, hiding them beneath bundles of herbs. Is there another way out? Nahuel asked. She shook her head. The only way down was the stairs, and they could already hear footsteps climbing toward them. But before Nahuel or Clara could react, Tomas did something that stunned them both. He straightened his shoulders, lifted his chin, and walked toward the top of the stairs. "What are you doing?" Clara whispered frantically, reaching for him. "I'm going to face him," Tomas said, and his voice was not the voice of a scared little boy. It was the voice of a landowner. "This is my fight." And before they could stop him, he started down the stairs. Don Mario was waiting in the main chapel. He was a large man, soft and well-fed, dressed in fine clothes that couldn't hide the cruelty in his small, dark eyes. He smiled when he saw Tomas appear on the stairs. "Well, well," he sneered, "the little runaway heir." Tomas stopped halfway down, his small hand gripping the rickety railing. "I know who you are, Don Mario, and I know you tried to buy me from Eusebio." Mario laughed, a loud, ugly sound that echoed in the ruined church. "Buy you? I didn't need to buy you, boy. I already own you. Your father signed a contract. He gave me custody of you in exchange for his debts. It's all perfectly legal." Clara and Nahuel appeared at the top of the stairs behind Tomas. Mario's men tensed, their hands going to their guns, but Mario waved them down. "Ah, the kidnappers," he said smoothly. "The half-breed healer and the Apache murderer. I've been looking for you too." "He came with us because he was afraid of you," Clara said, her voice shaking with rage. "That," Mario said with a cold smile, "will be for a judge to decide, if any of you live to see a judge." The threat hung in the air, heavy and cold. At that moment, Thomas reached into his pocket. He pulled out the small, cloth-wrapped bundle his mother had left him. With trembling fingers, he unwrapped it. Inside was a heavy gold medallion on a chain, engraved with a fancy crest, the crest of the Alvarez family. Don Mario's smug expression vanished. His eyes locked onto the medallion with a raw, naked greed. "Give that to me," he commanded. "No," Tomas said, closing his small fist around it. "I said, give it to me." "And I said no," Tomas repeated, staring directly into the rich man's eyes. For the first time, he wasn't afraid. He had something this powerful man wanted, and that gave him power. "Do you know what happened to your mother, boy?" Mario asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I know you killed her," Tomas said, the words tumbling out of him raw and true. The silence in the chapel was absolute. Even Mario's own men looked shocked. "That is a lie," Mario finally hissed, but a sheen of sweat had appeared on his forehead. He gestured to his men. "Take them. Take them all." But before anyone could move, a single gunshot exploded through the mission. It came from outside. One of Mario's men spun around, a cry of pain tearing from his throat as he clutched a shattered shoulder. "Down!" Nahuel roared, shoving Clara and Thomas behind the crumbling stone altar. A figure appeared in the open doorway of the mission. He was an old man, dressed in the simple brown robes of a priest, but he was carrying a rifle like he'd been born with it in his hands. "Father Clemente," Clara whispered, her heart leaping into her throat. The priest walked into the chapel, his eyes calm but filled with fire. Two armed cowboys followed him in. "Don Mario," the priest said, his voice echoing through the stone hall. "Fancy meeting you here." "This is not the church's business," Mario snarled. "On the contrary," Father Clemente replied. "When it concerns documents signed by my late brother, Father Francisco, it is very much the church's business, especially when those documents prove you are a thief and a land swindler." Mario went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." The priest smiled, a thin, hard smile. "Then you won't mind if we take these documents to the authorities." His eyes found Clara behind the altar. "Clara, my child, I believe you have something for me." Clara slowly stood up, clutching her medicine bag. "How did you know?" "Your father told me where he hid the papers years ago," the priest said gently. and I have been waiting for the child of Maria Esperanza to come and claim them. That boy belongs to me, Mario bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. On the basis of a contract you forced on a drunk? Father Clemente challenged. A contract for a boy who wasn't even his son to sell? Tomas's head snapped up. What? The priest looked at Tomas, his expression softening. Child, Eusebio was never your father. Your real father was Fernando Herrera, a good man who died defending his wife and his land from Don Mario's men. He didn't abandon me, Tomas whispered. No, the priest said. He was murdered. Just like your mother was murdered on Don Mario's orders because she would not sign her land over to him. Lies! Mario screamed, but he was cornered, a trapped animal. Is it? Father Clemente asked, pulling a small leather-bound book from his robes. This was your mother's diary, Thomas. In it, she details every threat Don Mario made against her. I also have sworn statements from witnesses who saw his men take her away that night. Tears streamed down Thomas's face, but they were tears of fury, not sadness. You killed them, he choked out. You killed my parents. You can't prove any of it, Mario spat. Actually, Clara said, her voice clear and strong as she finally pulled the papers from her bag. We can. The priest's eyes glinted like steel. And we have another witness, Eusebio. The name dropped into the silent church like a stone. Last night, Father Clemente continued, Eusebio came to me, drunk and drowning in guilt. He confessed everything, how Mario paid him to pretend to be your father, how he threatened to harm you if Eusebio ever told the truth. He's a worthless drunk, Mario yelled. No one will believe him. Perhaps not, the priest agreed. But then again, you don't have to, said a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned. It was Eusebio. He was holding an old rifle and his hands were steady. His eyes, for the first time Thomas could remember, were clear. I came to do what I should have done years ago, he said, his gaze finding Thomas. I came to ask for your forgiveness. You knew, Thomas said, the pain of that betrayal still sharp. You knew all along. I knew, Eusebio said, tears running down his face. And I hated myself every day for it. I was cruel to you because I thought it would make it easier to let you go. But it just broke us both. In that moment of raw emotion, Don Mario saw his chance. He lunged not at the priest, not at Nahuel, but at Thomas, grabbing for the boy to use as a shield. He never made it. Nahuel moved like a blur, a silent, avenging shadow. He slammed into Mario, and the two men crashed to the stone floor. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Nahuel, hardened by years of survival, was a force of nature. Mario, softened by years of greed, was nothing. In seconds, it was over. Nahuel had Mario pinned to the ground, the tip of his knife pressed against the soft flesh of his throat. It's over, Nahuel said, and it was. Macario's men dropped their weapons. Eusebio lowered his rifle. Justice had finally come to the old mission. They took Don Mario away in chains. The lands, Father Clemente explained, were legally, indisputably, Tomas's. Standing there in the dusty, sunlit chapel, Tomas looked at the faces around him, Clara, who had healed him, Nahuel, who had protected him, Eusebio, who had finally found his courage, Father Clemente, who had guarded his truth. This was his family. What am I going to do with so much land? He whispered. Clara knelt beside him. You're going to build a home, she said. A place for people like us, the ones who don't belong anywhere else. A place of safety. Nahuel placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. We'll help you, he said. And for the first time, Nahuel smiled. A real, genuine smile. Will you stay? Tomas asked, looking between them. With me? We're not going anywhere, Clara promised. Months later, in a green valley that now belonged to a 10-year-old boy, a new town was being born. Houses made of adobe and hope, built by people who had been lost, but now were found. Tomas worked every day, helping Clara in her new herb garden, learning to ride and track with Nahuel. He was no longer a scared, worthless boy. He was a leader, a son. One evening, as they sat under a sky full of stars, Thomas looked at the Apache warrior who had become his father. "Nahuel," he asked softly, "how much would you pay for me?" Nahuel didn't answer with words. He just wrapped a strong arm around the boy's shoulders and pulled him into a tight embrace. And in that silence, Thomas finally, truly, understood his own worth. It couldn't be counted in silver pesos because you can't put a price on love. You can't buy a family. And you can't sell a home. If you were moved by this story of courage and justice, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button because you never know what secrets are hiding just under the surface of the world.